In 2016, a fitness instructor was walking through a seemingly empty church at about 4 in the morning, waiting for her class to start, when she encountered a strange individual. The individual was wearing what appeared to be full SWAT gear, and they were wandering down the halls armed with hand tools, breaking glass, and opening random doors. The mother and fitness instructor known as Missy Beavers was found dead shortly after 5 a.m. by one of her students. What exactly transpired between her and her attacker is not publicly known. At the time of her death, the cameras outside of the church were not working. However, police did release snippets of the footage recorded on the interior. Despite having this footage, police were still unable to determine the suspect's sex or any other identifying factors. They did, however, establish that the suspect was likely targeting Missy Beavers and attempted to stage it as a burglary gone wrong. Soon after the attack, police released more footage, this time from a nearby parking lot. Roughly 2 hours before Missy Beavers entered the church, a silver Nissan Altima entered the parking lot of a sporting goods store up the road. The driver bizarrely flashed his headlights and drove in circles before parking in a secluded area. They stayed there for a few minutes, never exiting the vehicle, before finally leaving. Ultimately, the case of Missy Beavers remains unsolved.
A real true crime case of a killer clown. On the morning of May 26, 1990, Marlene Warren had a visitor at her door. When she opened her door, standing in front of her was a clown holding flowers and balloons. Before Marlene even knew what was happening, the clown took out a revolver and shot her in the face. Since it's now October, you guys have been asking me to cover the most terrifying true crime cases I know, and truly, what is scarier than a real killer clown? Marlene's son and some of his friends were over for breakfast, and they could see everything that happened. They saw the clown just turn around and walk slowly, silently back to the car that they came in, get in the car, and just drive away like nothing happened. Marlene was rushed to the hospital, but sadly passed away 2 days later from her injuries. When a woman is killed, the first person that investigators look at is the husband. Marlene and Mike Warren owned multiple properties and businesses together, but they were also having severe marital problems. Marlene suspected that her husband Mike had been having an affair, and that she was even afraid for her life. She told multiple people before she passed away that if something happened to her, her husband was the one that did it. But her husband had an airtight alibi. It could not have been him that came to her house dressed like a clown and had shot her. Could he have hired someone? And what about the woman that he was having this rumored affair with? That woman was Sheila Keene. Sheila was also married actually to a member of the KKK. And it was pretty well-known knowledge that Sheila and Michael were having an affair, that they were sleeping together, although they always denied it. They claimed that they were just friends. But even Sheila's own neighbors thought that Michael was her husband instead of her actual KKK husband because of how often Michael was over at her house. But just because two people may or may not be having an affair is not enough to charge someone with murder. Well, luckily, the investigators started to gather a lot of convincing evidence. They were able to track down the costume shop where the clown costume had been purchased. The owners of the costume shop said that 2 days before Marlene was killed, a woman with dark brown hair and big brown eyes came after closing to the shop, frantically saying that she needed to get in because she needed to get a clown costume. This would be, typical behavior if it was the day before Halloween, but this was in the middle of spring. And the owners of that costume shop were able to identify Sheila as that woman from a photo lineup. And the same description of the same woman, long brown hair, big brown eyes, was seen at the Publix grocery store right near Marlene's house the day that she passed away, purchasing those flowers and balloons that the clown was holding. 4 days after Marlene was killed, the same car that the clown was seen driving was found abandoned in a parking lot 8 miles away. In the backseat of the car was a Publix grocery store bag, so things are lining up, and inside of the bag were orange wig fibers, likely from the orange clown wig. And that same car had actually been reported stolen. It was from a used car shop. A used car shop that Marlene's husband Michael was the owner of, so things are not looking good. And speaking of Marlene's husband Michael, investigators do not trust this man. They believe that Michael and his mistress Sheila were the ones that killed Marlene, so they start investigating every single aspect of Michael's life. They start investigating his businesses. Remember, him and Marlene owned a lot of businesses together, and they actually found out that Michael had been committing a lot of fraud through his businesses. They actually charged him with 43 3 counts of fraud and racketeering, and he went to prison for 3 years because of this. After his release, him and Sheila both just kind of disappeared. They both left the area and no one knew where they went. And that's all that the investigators had for a really, really long time. This case went unsolved for years and years. Luckily, the investigators could not let this case go. Even independent journalists were unable to let this case go. They demanded that Marlene's case did not go unsolved, and what they were able to find next was shocking. Turns out, 12 years after Marlene was killed, her husband Michael married Sheila in a secret wedding. Now remember, Michael always denied having an affair with Sheila. Sheila, who is the prime suspect in his wife's murder. He married the prime suspect in his wife's murder 12 years later in a secret wedding. It's like super suspicious. It had been years since Marlene had been killed, and investigators and independent journalists were able to work together and finally track down Michael and Sheila. Turns out, after being married in secret for a little bit, the two of them actually moved states together. They opened a restaurant together. Sheila had dyed her hair suspiciously the same color as Marlene's hair, looking like her husband's dead wife, kind of weird. Sheila was also going by a new name, and everyone that knew Sheila and Michael in this new area that went to their restaurant all the time had no idea that the two of them had ever been married before. They did not know that Michael had a dead wife. They knew nothing about any of this. This is when we found out that the investigators were actually holding on to a really, really big piece of evidence. They had DNA that was left in that car that the clown had drove that was abandoned in that parking lot. But DNA testing was not the same in the 90s that it was now. But the investigators kept onto it just in case DNA testing ever got better. So they start retesting all of their old DNA, and that's when they finally linked Sheila's DNA to the DNA that they found in the car. It had been 27 years since Marlene had been killed, and Sheila was finally arrested for murdering her on September 26, 2017. And I bet for those nearly 3 decades, Sheila believed that she had gone away with it. They actually found a photo that was taken years after Marlene was killed of Sheila at a Halloween party, and guess what she dressed up as? She dressed up as a clown. Tell me that's not the sickest, most evil thing you've ever heard of. And I bet in her mind, she thought it was funny, dressing up like a clown for Halloween a few years after killing Marlene while dressed up as a clown. Originally, the prosecution was going for the death penalty in the trial of Sheila Keene, but after the trial was postponed so many times during like the 2020 pandemic, they ended up offering her a plea deal, and sadly she did take the plea deal, and it was if she pled guilty to killing Marlene that they would only give her 12 years in prison, and she's expected to be released next year in 2025. Apparently, there was never enough evidence to charge Michael Warren in the murder of his wife. As of right now, only Sheila has ever been charged, which really upsets me because I feel like we had enough evidence to charge Sheila. So if we were going to offer her a plea deal, it would have been to incriminate Michael. But definitely let me know your thoughts on that. I doubt I'm not the only person that also believes that Michael is guilty and this was a conspiracy that he came up with his mistress Sheila to kill his wife. And I bet that that's going to be frustrating for a lot of you that, like me, believe that Michael Warren as of right now has gone away with the murder of his wife. And honestly, Sheila got away with only kind of a slap on the wrist. You know, she got to live freely for 27 years before being arrested and then was sentenced to only 12 years.
I think it's so crazy when police officers and law enforcement are investigating one case and just trying to figure out one murder, and they find other information and start peeling back the layers to find out that the killer they're looking into might be responsible for taking more than one life. That is so crazy to me. Those are the scariest people, in my opinion. That's terrifying. We're back in the UK. We're talking about Amanda Jane Dowler, also commonly referred to as Millie Dowler by her friends and family. This was in Surrey, England in 2002. Millie was a 13-year-old schoolgirl. She was abducted in plain sight, broad daylight on March 21st, 2002. She lived in Surrey with her mom, dad, and her older sister Gemma. Her and Gemma were the best of friends. They were really close. Millie was described as a ray of sunshine. She would light up any room that she walked into. She was a little shy, but very friendly and very approachable. The kind of person that you always wanted to be around. March 21st, 2002, it was a Thursday. Millie called her father after school around 3:47 p.m. to let him know that she was going to going to be home in 30 minutes. Her and her friend had stopped by a cafe after school, but they left the cafe at 4:05 and Millie was going to start her walk home. Only 3 minutes after that, so at 4:08 p.m., she was seen walking along Station Avenue by a friend that was friends with her older sister. That was the last time Millie Dowler would ever be seen again. When Millie didn't come home, her parents and her sister began to get worried, so by 7 p.m. that night, she had been reported missing. Immediately, a search began. There were so many officers and so many detectives that got called in to help. Actually, some of the detectives that helped in this case were the ones that helped out in the Sarah Payne case. Sarah Payne was only 8 years old when she was kidnapped. I have a video of her on my page as well if you want to look at that. Officers went to go speak to Millie's friend, specifically her friend Danielle, who confirmed they were at school together. They went to the cafe and then Millie called her dad to let him know she was going to be home, and then she started to walk. That was all caught on CCTV footage as well, which is why we know exact times. But her friend said she was not concerned about Millie walking home at all because it was broad daylight. They lived in a nice area. Millie was going to be walking alongside a main road. She did double check with Millie to make sure she was fine with walking home, and Millie just said, "Don't be ridiculous. I will be absolutely fine." And then they went their separate ways. March 22nd, so the next day, it's a Friday now. This quickly reached nationwide news. Millie's face was absolutely everywhere. There were over 100 police officers and helicopters searching streets, fields, bodies of water, thinking of any possible place that Millie could be, but there was nothing. They knew that because this has just happened, people's memories of that day were still fresh, so they wanted to talk to everyone they could in the chance that somebody remembered something, a small or a big detail that may give them a hint to know where Millie went. When officers and detectives were first looking into this, they did not think that there was foul play involved or that something horrible had happened. Because she vanished in the middle of the day, she was seen walking home 1 second and the next second she was gone. She was on a main road, nobody saw anything, no one reported any sort of screaming or anything alarming, making them think that there was no sort of struggle. So they kind of started thinking that maybe she ran away on her own. Officers started getting CCTV footage of the path that Millie would have taken on her walk home. She wasn't seen there at first glance, but it had just rained, so there was a little bit of water in the camera footage, kind of making it hard to see. They ended up having to send that footage to America, to the FBI, to get that cleared up. That ended up taking 6 months. After 6 long months, they got the footage back, and you can see a car, and it looked like a human figure was talking to someone inside the car. At first, they thought that may have been Millie, but that ended up being cleared up, and it had nothing to do with her disappearance. Millie went missing in March. It wasn't until September 18th that human remains were found in some woods that were over 20 miles away from where she went missing. The body was so severely decomposed, they were not able to declare a cause of death, and it didn't have any clothing on it, it didn't have any belongings around it or anything, so through dental records, they were able to confirm that it was the body of 13-year-old Millie Dowler. They brought in experts to look around the area where Millie's body was found, and they were able to confirm that her body had been left there the same week that she went missing back in March. This was now quickly changed to a homicide investigation. They closed down the surrounding area from where she had been found. They questioned over 6,000 people and still came up empty-handed. November 2004, cops get a call from a different department saying that they may have a lead. Officers in London had been looking into the deaths of multiple young girls around the area. They had a suspect named Levi Belfield. Levi now lived in London where he was suspected of those murders, but prior to that, he lived very close to the area where Millie Dowler disappeared from. Levi was a 35-year-old man. He had 5 children with 3 different women, also had a past criminal records for theft and assault, as well as previous charges for abduction and false imprisonment in 2001 and attempted murder in 2003, but he was never sentenced for that. He was described by ex-girlfriends to be really sweet one second and absolutely psychotic the next. He was known to be very violent towards women, had absolutely no respect for them, and just looked down on them, really. He was an extremely controlling partner in a relationship. He wouldn't allow them to do anything without him. He was also violent, so he would often kick them, hit them, punch them. Yeah, he was absolutely horrible. And cops had actually gone to his house previously in connection for Millie's murder because at the time he lived so close, they were trying to question him. They knocked on his door over 10 times, but he just never answered, so they never talked to him. The 2 other murders that he was suspected of, first was 22-year-old Amelie Delagrange, I think that's how you say her name. August 19th, 2004, Amelie had a night out with her friends and she was going to take the train back home, but ended up taking a shortcut through a field. When she was walking through the field, she got hit really hard over the head, fell down, obviously, was left unconscious. She was found, taken to the hospital, but died there shortly after. When they were doing the investigation for that murder was when Levi Belfield became a suspect. While they were doing that investigation for that case, they decided to look at similar attacks in the area, so they looked into Marcia McDonald. She was murdered February 4th, 2003. Very similar case. She was walking home late at night, hit over the head, died a few days later. So they keep peeling the layers back, really trying to figure out who this Levi guy was, and he was terrifying. They also later find out about about 18-year-old Kate Sheedy. In May 2004, she was out with friends, took a bus home late that night. Levi saw her, drove his car to hit Kate at a very high speed, then reversed the car, ran her over again, and then drove off, and Kate somehow survived that and was able to call the police. She survived, thankfully. She was able to recover, and later she was able to give a full description of that white car that had ran her over. While looking through CCTV footage, they see the white car that was following the bus that Kate was in, and that white vehicle was identified as the same exact car that Levi was driving at that time. That's how that connection of the car and Levi were put together. And they looked back at CCTV footage from when Marsha McDonald was on her way home. They see the same white car that had been following her. July 6, 2005, Levi was brought in for questioning in connection to the kidnap and the death of Millie Dowler. The interviews are so weird because he doesn't say anything, meaning he doesn't deny anything. Even ask him, do you deny it? You haven't denied anything yet. And he just keeps saying over and over, no comment. Investigators and law enforcement could immediately tell by Levi's demeanor and the way that he was acting that he was unbelievably uncomfortable. An investigator even said that when he walked out of that interview room, he was 100% convinced that he had the right man, that he was the one responsible for all the deaths. Now they just have to prove it. What they needed now was concrete evidence, something that could lead them to an arrest, which is when they connected with Levi's most recent girlfriend, Emma Mills. He had children with her. Emma Mills said that at the time of Millie's death, Emma and Levi were living together in a place that was less than 1 mile away from where Millie went missing. However, at the time of Millie's disappearance, they weren't actually staying at that house. They were house sitting for some friends, I guess. They asked Emma about the night of Millie's disappearance. Emma says she has no idea where Levi was that night. She tells officers that Levi did not get home until around 10 or 11 p.m. and he came back in a different outfit that he left in. They go to bed. Levi wakes up around 3 and 4 in the morning and says that he has to go back to their house. So they're currently sleeping at the house that they're house sitting in, but for some reason Levi has to go to their house at 4 in the morning. The next day, Levi starts moving out all of their stuff from their house and moved them into this new awful house for no reason at all. Emma, his girlfriend at the time, thought this is getting really weird, something is suspicious, something is wrong, especially because their bed sheets were missing. So she goes up to Levi and says, what were you doing on the night of the 21st? Levi's response to that is, what do you think I've done, Millie? Emma also tells the police that the car that Levi was driving at that time was a red Nexia. I think that's how you say that word. Interestingly enough, Levi had actually reported that car missing days after Millie's disappearance. With that information of now knowing what kind of car Levi was driving at the time and knowing what they should look for, they go back and look at the CCTV footage they had of where Millie should have been walking on her way home. And there it is. The red Nexia car. So they immediately put out tips and alerts for the car. When they put this car out to the public, another young girl comes forward saying that she recognizes that car, that the night before Millie's disappearance, the car tried to pick her up and lure her inside of the car. She described the man driving and it was a perfect description of Levi, confirming that he was driving around the area trying to pick up young girls. Police then speak to another one of Levi's ex-girlfriends. One of the comments that she made was that her and Levi would often take their dogs on a walk. The place where they would walk their dogs is the same woods where Millie's body was found. That confirms that Levi was aware of the woods and would often go there. We have all these pieces of information confirming their suspicions and their theories of Levi. May 2006, Levi Belfield is charged with the murders of Amelie, Marsha, and the attempted murder of Kate. Now the police were just trying to find direct forensic evidence to show that Levi killed Millie as well. While the investigators are trying to find evidence to prove that Levi was the only one that could have killed Millie, Levi gets sentenced to life in prison for the other murders. Experts were able to narrow down the exact spot where Millie Dowler was taken from. So the experts narrowed down that she was taken from Station Avenue. The only residential areas that you have surrounding that is a neighborhood called Collingwood Place. That neighborhood was Levi Belfield's neighborhood where he was living at the time. The belief and the conclusion that they came up with was that Levi took her from that street, took her back to his apartment, killed her there. It's thought that when he went home that night around 3 and 4 in the morning, it was to clean up Millie's body and dispose of it in the woods. All the evidence points to that. Everything is adding up. He then got rid of the car, moved out of the apartment, obviously was trying to cover something up, and it definitely was the murder of Millie Dowler. Finally, March 31st, 2010, 8 years after Millie went missing, Levi Belfield is officially charged with Millie Dowler's abduction and murder. And remember, he was already serving 3 life sentences for murder and attempted murder. June 23rd, 2011, he was found guilty and sentenced to another life sentence. In January of 2016, Levi admitted that he abducted and killed Millie, but the next month, February 2016, he changes his story and says, never mind, that wasn't me.
These pictures were discovered on the camera of 2 missing girls, who were later found dead under very strange circumstances. This is a crazy one, guys. Hi, I'm Meg, I talk about true crime, and let's get into this case. 21-year-old Chris and 22-year-old Lisanne grew up in Utrecht in the Netherlands. They worked in a cafe together and they were saving up to go on a trip. They were like besties, they just moved in together, their lives were just getting started. This trip that they had planned was 6 weeks in Panama. They wanted to learn some Spanish, volunteer. It was also a way of celebrating graduating. They set off for the trip on the 15th of March of 2014. They spent the first 2 weeks of their trip doing their own thing, and then on the 28th of March, they went and stayed with a host family. In a place called, I'm going to put the name, I'm not going to try and pronounce it because I'll butcher it. Their plan there was to volunteer with kids, but those plans would never happen because of the hike they decided to take on the 1st of April. Chris and Lisanne left for this hike at 11 a.m. and they took the host family's dog with them. They were not planning on being on this hike for longer than just that day because they brought like 1 water bottle between them and not a lot of food. They also had a hike booked with like an actual guide the next morning. But that evening, the dog made it back to the host family's house, but the girls were nowhere to be seen. No one was actually that concerned until the next day when they didn't show up for that booked hike. That's when the police were called and they started searching. On the 3rd of April, there was a small search. Nothing was found. Chris and Lisanne's families would end up actually flying into Panama to help with the searches. But it wouldn't be until June 14th, so months later, that they actually found something. A couple found Lisanne's backpack, but this same couple said that they walked through that area the day before and the backpack definitely wasn't there. In the bag had both Lisanne and Chris's phones, alongside a digital camera, passports, some clothes. At this point, the girls had been missing for 10 weeks in a rainforest, yet the contents of the backpack were dry and not damaged. They weren't dirty either, like they were in good condition. And I'm sorry, the iPhones in 2014 would not have survived that water damage. When they looked on the phone records, they were able to see that the girls had tried to call the police 6 hours into their hike. They had actually attempted to call the police many times throughout the first few days that they went missing, but there was just no signal, so nothing was going through. So mind you, the girls went missing on the 1st of April. On the 5th of April, Lisanne's phone dies. But then on the 6th of April, someone was trying to get into Chris's phone. The password was entered multiple times, but whoever was trying, my earring just fell out. Whoever was trying failed to get onto the phone. Right. Did something happen to Chris? Was Lisanne trying to get into the phone? Or was it someone else? And then they went through the digital camera. This is when this case gets weird. So first we have the photos from the 1st of April when they originally left for the hike. These are the photos. Very normal, happy girls hiking together. It's interesting to note that at no point in these before photos, I guess we can call them, is a dog seen. On the 8th of April, mind you, 8 days after they went missing, 90 pictures were taken on the cameras between the hours of 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. They're seemingly like deep in the forest, it's clearly raining, and all you can see is just like darkness, rain, trees. Now, one thing I want to note is that I think immediately the first thought you have is they were clearly just trying to use a camera to light their way. But do note that if you're in complete darkness, that flash is just going to further blind you. And also, if they were missing at that point for 8 days, don't you think that they would like maybe move in the daylight and know not to move in the night because they wouldn't know where they were going? This photo here is very bizarre. It's almost like they're trying to show us something. Maybe they're not, but there's something about like the leaf and how it's placed. It's just very odd. And then there's this one of the back of, I believe, Lisanne's head. And some believe that where it's circled here, there's maybe blood, but that's not been proven. But this just proves that 8 days after they disappeared, there was 2 of them because someone will have taken that photo. But was it Chris? Or was it someone else? It's also interesting to note that the camera did have a recording feature. You'd think that they'd maybe leave a message for their family or something on it, but they didn't, which makes me think that maybe they weren't alone. Back to the search, they decided to search around where the backpack was found, and that's when they found something really disturbing. They found a pair of denim shorts folded up neatly on a rock and a boot. The boot had a foot in it. You heard me. It wasn't just a boot. It had a whole human foot still in it. The foot belonged to Lisanne, meaning that when she passed, she was wearing her hiking boots. And in her foot, her metatarsals were broken, which is like the bones on the top of the foot, I believe. Examiners believe this could have been caused by like a heavy rock falling onto the foot or a really bad fall. The timeline of when they found all the bones and the foot and everything is over the span of a few months. They found 33 more bones and actually also an entire skeleton belonging to another girl that had gone missing years ago. She had been missing 2 years. Some of the bones of the 33 belonged to Chris, some belonged to Lisanne. But the strangest part of it all, Chris's bones were bleached. Lisanne's were not. From where the bones were found, it would have taken the girls an entire day to walk there. Bleaching bones is a way of getting rid of like evidence on them. It can occur naturally if there's lime around, but there was no lime in this area. Forensics do believe that Lisanne's skin was tampered with at one point, but that's just a theory, not confirmed. They believed that parts of it could have been kept in like a container or something for a few days and then placed there. Once again, theory, not confirmed. I'm going to quickly go through the main theories of what happened to them, and I'd love to hear what you guys think. Theory number 1 is that there's a cannibalistic tribe that live in that rainforest and they got to the girls. This is very, very like speculated. Rarely, by the way, I found this in like the deep depths of Reddit, but there was a lot of people who believe that this tribe is real. That one has nothing to back it up. I just thought I would put it in there. Theory 2 and 1 I definitely do not believe is they died of natural causes. The trails were apparently really easy to follow up until one point where it kind of split off. And it would say like, don't go down this way. Do go down this way. And maybe they went down the one they weren't meant to go down. And apparently once you're lost in that forest, like you can get disoriented so quickly. Some believe maybe the dog ran away and they went to chase it, got lost. Maybe one of them got injured and that's why the other was trying to get into the other's phone. I just don't believe this because there's so much contradicting evidence. Why were the bones scattered? Animals, yeah, maybe, but where are the rest of the bones? There's like 200 and something bones in a human body and they've only got 33 for 2 girls. Also, why were Chris's bleached? I get really annoyed at that theory because I just don't think natural causes is like, it doesn't make sense to me. Third theory is that it had something to do with the Mexican cartel. They apparently do bleach bones with lime to get rid of evidence, so there you go. It's also apparently used to speed up decay time. And the police refused to release the autopsy results, so that's a bit suspicious. Maybe there's some corruption, but that's also just a theory. Nothing has substantial evidence. It's awful to think that the families are probably never going to get that closure. Like, these girls were just starting their lives.
Kristen Smart was a 19-year-old student that vanished. Her case was a mystery for years. It's probably one of the biggest missing people's cases because there were no answers for 25 years. Also, Kristen Smart, not to be confused with Elizabeth Smart. Kristen Smart was one of 3 children born to parents Denise and Stan. Kristen was actually born in West Germany. They were there because of their parents' job, but the family moved to Stockton, California, which is where Kristen would be raised. Kristen absolutely loved being a big sister. She loved being around her siblings, taking care of them. She actually loved kids so much. She ended up later becoming a babysitter when she got older. She had a super outgoing, lively personality from the moment she was born, a super entertaining little girl. She was very creative and she loved to be active. Kristen graduated high school in 1995 and she enrolled in California Polytechnic State University located in San Luis Obispo, California. Her freshman year was good and bad. Classes were hard. She also had a part-time job as a lifeguard. She was having a hard time balancing school, a social life, and a job. But on the other hand, she was doing as best as she could, taking the time to be independent and meet new people and find herself as she she entered this new stage of life. Memorial Day weekend of 1996, that Friday, Kristen made plans with her friend Margarita to go out. Before going out, she left a voicemail for her parents that said, good news, I will call you on Sunday. Kristen and Margarita were trying to find a party to go to. They did stop by a few places, but none really fit the vibe that they were looking for. After a little while, Margarita says, listen, I'm tired. I'm gonna go home. You can stay out, but I'm sleepy. Here's my room key. Have fun, be safe, and I'll see you back at the dorms. Kristen isn't ready to go home yet, so she takes Margarita's keys and they part ways. Kristen finds a birthday party at a frat house. She doesn't even know anyone there, but she wants to go in and check it out. At the party, she talks to a lot of people. She has fun, and the party starts to settle down around 2 in the morning. Two students, Tim and Cheryl, were walking out of the party when they see Kristen Smart. She's outside, lying on the grass on some random lawn. They get her up. They decide they're gonna help her out and get her back to the dorms. While the three of them are walking, another student from the party named Paul Flores catches up to them, and he joins them in helping walk Kristen home. Kristen, Tim, Cheryl, and Paul are walking together. It's dark, it's cold, it's late. Tim leaves first. He walked a different way towards his car. Cheryl is the next to leave. Her dorm was a different way than Kristen and Paul, so Paul continues to walk to Kristen until they get to his building. From his building, you can see Kristen's building, so according to Paul, he watched Kristen walk the rest of the way to her building, go inside, and then he went inside of his. Kristen was supposed to stay the night at Margarita's dorm, but she never made it there. When Kristen's roommate got back in town that Saturday, she noticed that Kristen had not been back at their dorm either, and Kristen every single Sunday would call her parents. But that Sunday, she didn't call them, and everyone started to get progressively more and more concerned as everyone in her life were starting connecting the dots, realizing that no one had seen or heard from Kristen since that Friday night. Her friends get together, they report her missing to campus police, but the police didn't really take it seriously. They call Kristen's house, they ask her parents if she went home for the weekend, which she hadn't, and that absolutely freaks out her parents, now knowing that no one has seen or talked to her. But for whatever reason, neither campus police or the regular police station seemed to be concerned. They tried to tell Kristen's parents that Kristen probably just went away for the holiday weekend and that surely she would be back soon. It took officers so long to officially start their investigation. Kristen's parents had flown in to help put out flyers, but I don't think it was until that next Friday, May 31st, when officers really actually started trying to do something. They began by retracing Kristen's steps, going to where she was last seen, talking to and interviewing students that had been at that same party. And there were several students that brought up the same name, Paul Flores, the guy that was the last to see Kristen and the one that allegedly saw Kristen walk into her dorm building. Well, students were saying that there was something off and something creepy about Paul, that night he had been around Kristen a lot and that he was behaving weird towards her. Cops go talk to Paul. Paul says, yes, I did see Kristen that night, but you know what? I actually wasn't even supposed to be at that party. I just stopped by. I saw Kristen and she was being very flirty with guys, is what he's telling the cops. He says he then saw her after the party, said he joined those two students in walking her home, saw her go into her dorm, and then he went into his. But a few red flags. First of all, Paul had scratches on his hands. He had a black eye and other small injuries that I suspect were self-defense injuries, but I guess we don't really know. His demeanor in the interviews also sketch, visibly anxious, very uncomfortable. You would think, well, I would think that he was hiding information for sure. Not only that, but Paul Flores was known to be an aggressive boy overall, but also a weird guy around girls. In the 8th grade, he sent a kid to the hospital because he had anger issues and lost his temper. At a job that he had in high school, female coworkers reported that he was very creepy. His nickname at one point was Scary Paul. Throughout the years, there had been reports of girls reporting they felt uncomfortable around him. Some felt that he was stalking them. He would follow them home or just show up at places where they would be at uninvited. He would at times look in through their apartments through their windows at nighttime, creeping them out. Some girls did call the police when they saw him doing that, but nothing was ever really done about it. Campus police at the beginning of this investigation, terrible. They were not treating it as they should have. They were claiming that it didn't look like Kristen Smart had been the victim of a crime, and they said that they were treating the investigation as an adult missing under unusual circumstances. In June, the case was officially handed over to the county sheriff's department. They conducted searches with hundreds of volunteers, sniffer dogs, cadaver dogs, helicopters. They took sniffer dogs into different dorm buildings, and the dogs picked up Kristen's scent in none other than Paul's room. Even though Paul had moved out for the summer, his room was completely empty. It had been thoroughly cleaned. All of his belongings were out. The dogs still picked up the scent in his room. Paul's parents, his father Ruben and his mom Susan, were separated. They lived in different houses. Both cars that the parents owned, they got rid of after Kristen's disappearance. One they traded in and the other one was stolen. A co-worker of Susan's, the mom, mentioned that the night that Kristen went missing, she said that she was with Ruben and that that Ruben got a call in the middle of the night and didn't say anything and just left. July 22nd of 1996, police get a search warrant to search Ruben's house. I don't think that they really looked thoroughly at all, but they did find flyers of Kristen's disappearance underneath Ruben's mattress and underneath Paul's mattress. They also searched the mom's house, Susan's house, but they didn't find anything. But that August, Susan put her house up for rent. A family moved in. These are a few odd, weird things that happened when that family, those tenants, were living in Susan's house. First of all, when they first moved in, there was a trash can out front, and Susan told them not to touch it, not to do anything with it, and then Ruben just came up, picked it up, and took it away. In their backyard, there were flower boxes, but every time they would try and plant flowers, the flowers just wouldn't grow, and when they looked more into it, they realized it was because there was a layer of cement in the flower boxes. A neighbor told the family that that cement was laid down in the summer of 1996, right around when Kristen went missing. Another neighbor also claimed that they had seen Paul's father, Ruben, digging something up for hours in the middle of the night. And in my opinion, this one gives me chills. This is the most suspicious, I think, is that when that family moved into Susan's house, they started hearing a watch alarm go off around 4:20 in the morning. It sounded like the alarm was coming from the ground. They could never really figure out exactly where it was coming from, and then eventually it just stopped. But Kristen was a lifeguard. She worked the 5 a.m. shift, meaning she probably woke up around 4:20, probably had an alarm set. And if Paul killed Kristen and his dad helped cover it up, maybe they forgot about the watch. Susan ends up kicking the family out of the house, but before they move out, they work with law enforcement and they have cadaver dogs come and sniff around. The dogs alerted to a smell that was where that mysterious trash can once had been. A lot of things, so many things happened throughout the years. Tips, leads, search warrants, lawsuits, restraining orders. It got messy. In May of 2002, Kristen Smart was legally declared dead and her family was devastated. I mean, they had been the entire time, but I just can't imagine. In 2019, the case got a lot of attention again. It was back in the media, podcasts were coming out about it, and people were giving it the attention it deserved again. In January of 2020, law enforcement was able to recover the 2 vehicles from the Flores family that they had gotten rid of. In February, more search warrants were put out for the house where Susan lived, the house where Ruben lived, and the house where Paul now lived. On April 13th of 2021, police finally arrested Paul Flores, who was 44 years old at the time, and his father Ruben, who was 80 years old. Paul was charged with first-degree murder, and Ruben was charged with being an accessory to murder. Authorities believe that that night when Kristen went missing, Paul S.'d Kristen, killed her, and then called his father, who came and helped him get rid of the body, likely burying the body in those flower boxes in their backyard that they covered with cement. However, to this day, no remains have been found, which is crazy to me. On October 18th of 2022, Paul was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was only sentenced to 25 years. I guess it is hard because they don't have a body, so they can't 100% say this is exactly what happened and charge him accordingly. But 25 years, I don't know, but his father was found not guilty.